Blood splattered across the asphalt as her scream was swallowed by the night. 3 uniformed men badges gleaming under the streetlight pinned her down like she was prey. Their laughter was cruel, a twisted echo in the empty parking lot, as her pleas turned into desperate gasps. She was only 20, a bright black girl with a future, and in those final moments they stripped her of dignity, of breath, of life. When the silence came, it was worse than the violence. Her body lay broken, tossed aside like garbage, the red and blue lights flashing not in rescue but in celebration of their power. The killers were not faceless strangers, they were cops. Men sworn to protect, now executioners, drunk on hatred and authority. The call came just past midnight. Marcus Hayes, a retired FBI agent, picked up the phone expecting a routine disturbance in town. Instead, a trembling voice told him his daughter had been found cold, battered, lifeless. His knees buckled, the world blurred. His hands shook so violently the phone fell, clattering against the floor. He drove to the hospital in silence, headlights carving through the blackness, but hope still flickered. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she was hurt but breathing. He burst into the sterile room and saw her lying under a white sheet. The coroner's eyes said everything. Marcus pressed his hand against her forehead, still faintly warm, and the dam inside him broke. Grief roared into rage. The system he once served would not protect her. The men who murdered her would walk free, and in that instant, his path was sealed. He had lost his daughter, and now the cops who stole her life would lose theirs. He had lost his daughter, and now the cops who stole her life would lose theirs. But before that night of blood and silence, before rage swallowed him whole, there had been peace. Ordinary peace, the kind a man like Marcus Hayes had fought his whole career to protect. Marcus was a retired FBI agent, 52 years old, with silver streaks in his hair that his daughter, Alana, loved to tease him about. "You're turning into Morgan Freeman," she used to laugh, tugging at his mustache, and every time Marcus would swat her hand away with mock offense, before breaking into the smile only she could pull from him. Their home, a modest 2-story brick house at the edge of town, was a sanctuary. No matter how violent the world outside became, inside there was warmth, meals shared at a small wooden table, arguments about the best jazz record, the faint smell of his late wife's perfume still lingering in the hallway. Alana was his light. A sophomore at the university, sharp-minded and ambitious, she dreamed of becoming a lawyer, one who would fight for people like the ones her father once protected in the field. On quiet evenings, Marcus would sit at the kitchen counter, sipping his coffee, while she spread her textbooks across the table, muttering case law under her breath. "Slow down," Marcus would chuckle. "You're gonna burn out before you get your first trial." "I can't slow down," she'd shoot back with that stubborn fire in her eyes. "If I don't fight, who will?" It was in those moments that Marcus saw his late wife's spirit, living on inside their daughter, the same determination, the same warmth. Saturdays were their ritual. Alana would drag her father to the farmer's market, insisting on fresh produce and overpriced organic bread. Marcus would complain the whole way, pretending he hated every second, but he'd always give in when she looped her arm through his, then flashed that grin. Later they'd return home, cook dinner together, him chopping onions, her burning garlic, and laugh until the kitchen smelled of smoke and joy. On Sunday nights, they watched old crime dramas, the kind Marcus used to scoff at for getting procedure all wrong. Alana never cared. "It's TV, Dad," she'd tease. "Nobody wants to watch paperwork." By the end, Marcus would inevitably be drawn in, arguing about plot holes while she threw popcorn at him. To the world, Marcus Hayes was a hardened agent who had chased killers, dismantled syndicates, and stared into the faces of monsters. But to Alana, he was just Dad, the man who taught her how to ride a bike, who slipped folded $20 bills into her backpack, who drove across town in the middle of the night when her car broke down. Dad, it was ordinary. Ordinary in a way Marcus never took for granted. For a man who had seen the worst of humanity, every laugh with his daughter felt like a victory. Every moment proof that he had survived long enough to protect what mattered most. And yet, beneath the laughter, shadows lingered. Marcus noticed the way people in town looked at them, sometimes long, cold stares that carried the weight of old prejudice. He noticed how police cruisers slowed when Alana walked home from her part-time job at the diner, the way officers' eyes lingered too long. "Dad," she said one night at dinner, twirling spaghetti on her fork, "you ever think people still see us the same way they did in the 60s? Marcus's jaw tightened. "Some do," he admitted, "but you can't let them define you. You hear me? You're stronger than their hate." She nodded, but he saw the doubt flicker across her face. It haunted him, that look. Still, Life went on. Homework, late-night study sessions, grocery runs, laughter echoing in their small home. Peaceful, ordinary life. Until the night it wasn't night, his phone rang, shattering the fragile world they had built, ripping him from the warmth of their laughter into the cold grip of loss. And when Marcus looked back, he would remember the ordinary, the dinners, the jokes, the little arguments as the cruelest part of all, because they proved what he had lost wasn't just a daughter, it was a future, a life that should have been lived. Until the night it wasn't called came like a blade through silence. But the tragedy didn't happen in one sudden slash. It built slowly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Small signs that Marcus saw but never imagined would culminate in horror. It began with looks, long, unsettling stares in grocery aisles, on sidewalks, in diners. Alana, always proud, always radiant, noticed them too. "Why do they keep staring?" she asked one afternoon, sliding into her father's truck after work. Her voice was casual, but the tightness around her eyes betrayed unease. Marcus gripped the wheel harder than necessary, jaw clenching. "Because they see something they'll never be," he muttered. Then came the warnings. A friend of Marcus's, an old deputy who still wore the badge, pulled him aside after church. His voice was low, urgent. "Tell Alana to be careful. Some of the boys in uniform, they're not right. Got too much hate in their veins. They've been talking." Marcus felt the warning crawl down his spine. He nodded, thanked the man, but deep inside he wondered, could his daughter really be in danger in their own town? Alana dismissed his concerns. "Dad, I can't live in fear of every badge I see," she insisted. Her job at the diner was important to her. It gave her independence, a sense of pride, and most nights she came home safely, with stories about rude customers or generous tips. Life continued until the night she crossed paths with them. It was late, a Friday shift stretching past midnight. The diner had emptied out, its neon sign buzzing in the dark as Alana slipped off her apron and walked toward the small parking lot. The streets were quiet, the hum of distant traffic her only company. She pulled her jacket tighter, clutching her keys. When headlights swept across the lot, a police cruiser rolled in, too slow, too deliberate. Her steps faltered. 3 officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp, their smiles anything but friendly. Well, one of them drawled, his voice heavy with mockery. "What's a pretty girl like you doing out here all alone?" Alana straightened, forcing confidence into her voice. "I'm just getting off work." Another laughed, circling her like a predator. "Middle of the night. Not safe out here for someone like you." Her grip on the keys tightened. She tried to walk past, but one of them blocked her path. The air grew colder. Their laughter was low, dangerous, and laced with a cruelty she recognized immediately. She tried to run. They caught her. The assault was swift, brutal, and carried out under the cover of their authority. No one came. No one dared. Her screams bled into the night, swallowed by the emptiness of a town that had learned not to question the men in blue. When it was over, they left her broken, her body sprawled against the asphalt like discarded evidence. The flashing cruiser lights didn't call for help, they warned others to stay away, to look the other way. By morning, word spread through the town like wildfire. A young black woman raped and murdered, but whispers quickly tangled with lies. She must have provoked them. She shouldn't have been out so late. The rumors were poisoned, seeded by the very men who had killed her. Marcus's world shattered the moment he stepped into that hospital room, but the second blow came when he demanded justice. He knew the procedures, knew the system inside and out. He filed reports, spoke to detectives, and demanded arrests. But every door slammed in his face. The cops had alibis, carefully crafted and airtight. The diner's cameras were mysteriously offline that night. Witnesses were pressured into silence, their statements twisted. Internal Affairs dismissed the case before it even reached a courtroom. Marcus sat across from the district attorney, his fists trembling on the desk. "You know damn well they killed my daughter." The DA's eyes slid away, heavy with cowardice. "Without evidence, Agent Hayes, my hands are tied." "Evidence?" Marcus spat, his voice breaking. "She was raped and beaten to death. That's the evidence." But the DA only shook his head. "It won't stick. The department will bury this. Let it go. Let it go." Those words echoed in Marcus's chest like a death knell. He left the office, hollow, stumbling through streets that suddenly felt hostile, every pair of eyes a silent accusation. The town wasn't shocked, it wasn't even surprised. It was complicit, locked in a silence that screamed louder than any siren. At home, the house was too quiet. Her books still lay scattered on the dining table. Her jacket hung on the back. of a chair. Marcus sat in the living room, staring at the empty seat across from him where she used to tease him about his graying hair. Grief hollowed him, but beneath it simmered something darker. They had killed his daughter. The system had betrayed him. And in that betrayal, Marcus felt a familiar fire, the same fire he had carried when he hunted criminals as an FBI agent. But now it wasn't about procedure, or evidence, or law. It was personal. The storm that had built slowly, in warnings, stares, and whispers, had finally broken, and Marcus Hayes would not be the man who let it pass. He would be the storm. He would be the storm, but before Marcus Hayes could rise into vengeance, he sank into the deepest valley of despair a man could endure. Grief hollowed him out like fire, through dry timber, leaving only ash where once there had been strength. The nights were the worst. He would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, his body rigid, his mind replaying the sound of her voice. He could almost hear Alana laughing from the kitchen, teasing him about his gray hairs, or feel the soft weight of her head resting against his shoulder on movie nights. But when he turned, the chair beside him was empty. The silence was a predator, relentless and suffocating. Sleep came rarely, and when it did, it was cruel. Dreams of her lived smiling, running into his arms, ended abruptly in nightmares where he saw her dragged away, her screams cutting through the dark. He woke drenched, in sweat, fists clenched, chest heaving. More than once, he found himself reaching for his service weapon, half believing he could still save her if he moved fast enough. Guilt became his closest companion. He had been an FBI agent, a man trained to predict danger, to sense threats others overlooked, yet he hadn't seen this coming. He hadn't protected his own daughter. I should have known, he whispered to the dark, voice breaking. I should have been there. The guilt sank claws into him, whispering that he had failed, not just as an agent, but as a father. By day, his desperation turned outward. He threw himself into the system he once believed in. He demanded meetings with the police chief, filed petitions, requested federal oversight. He brought stacks of documents, photographs, timelines, everything his investigative mind could assemble, but at every turn, he hit a wall. One officer shrugged indifferently when Marcus pressed him for action. You've got to let the process play out, he said, as if the process hadn't already buried his daughter. Another official gave him the same rehearsed line. There's not enough evidence to prosecute. Not enough evidence. The phrase gnawed at him. Evidence had always been his weapon, the tool by which he'd brought down criminals. Now it was a chain around his neck, dragging him into helplessness. He tried going higher, contacting old FBI colleagues, reaching out to federal prosecutors. Some offered condolences, others silent. One friend spoke with a sorrowful tone Marcus couldn't stand to hear. Marcus, I know what you're going through, but you can't win this. They'll protect their own. Protect their own. The words seared into him, confirmation of what he already knew. The law he had once dedicated his life to wasn't built for men like him. It wasn't built for his daughter. His desperation turned into obsession. Files, photographs, maps all spread across the dining room table where Alana once studied her textbooks. He pieced together timelines, tracked shifts, traced the movements of the 3 officers that night. He barely ate, barely bathed. Neighbors saw the shadow of a man moving like a ghost through his home, blinds drawn, lights burning at odd hours. But obsession was fragile, balanced on a razor edge between focus and collapse. Marcus broke often, sometimes in violent outbursts, shouting at the walls, smashing glasses against the floor until shards littered the kitchen. Other times in suffocating quiet, sitting motionless in her room, clutching her favorite sweater to his chest, tears soaking the fabric. The house mocked him with reminders of her absence, her shoes at the door, her books stacked on the desk, the faint perfume clinging to her jacket. Each item was a blade, each memory cut deeper. And always the question whispered at him, was revenge worth it? He wrestled with it endlessly. As an agent he had spent years preaching restraint, believing in the rule of law. He had looked victims in the eyes and told them justice would come. But those had been words, backed by a system he now saw as rotten. Justice was an illusion, a shield for the guilty. He remembered training seminars, lectures from supervisors. The moment you take the law into your own hands, you become the very criminal you swore to stop. He had once believed that. Now, he questioned it. Was it really criminal to punish evil when the system refused? Or was it the only true justice left? Some nights he argued with himself aloud. If I kill them, I'll be no better than they are. Then the counter-voice, darker and more convincing. They raped and murdered your daughter. How could you be the same? The tug-of-war shredded him. One moment he was on his knees, praying for strength to forgive. The next, he was at the gun safe, fingers brushing cold steel, imagining the spray of blood, the silence after. The breaking point came 2 weeks after the funeral. Marcus had gone to the courthouse one final time. Clutching a folder of evidence, he had compiled himself cell phone records, security footage fragments, testimonies from people too afraid to speak. He begged the district attorney to reconsider. The DA skimmed the folder with disinterest, then pushed it back across the desk. "I'm sorry, Marcus. It won't hold up. Best thing you can do is grieve and move on." Grieve and move on. Marcus stood there, staring at the man who represented everything he once believed in. His hands trembled, not with fear but with fury so sharp it threatened to consume him. Move on. How could he move on when his daughter's killers walked free, laughing in their uniforms, shielded by the badge he once respected? He left the courthouse, without a word, his decision crystallizing in silence. The system had abandoned him. The law had betrayed him. That night, Marcus sat alone in the living room, staring at his daughter's photograph. Her smile radiated from the frame, a smile that would never again light up their home. He whispered to her picture, voice hoarse, "I tried. I swear I tried." His hand brushed the table where his old FBI badge lay beside his pistol. One symbol, of law, one of violence. His eyes lingered on the gun. For the first time, there was no hesitation. The war inside him quieted. Grief remained, guilt remained, but beneath it all, a cold clarity emerged. Marcus Hayes no longer questioned whether revenge was worth it. He knew, because the law had failed him, and now, justice would wear his face. Because the law had failed him, and now, justice would wear his face. But the men he planned to destroy were not hiding in shadows. They were not criminals lurking in alleys or fugitives running from justice. They lived in plain sight, shielded by the uniforms they wore and the power those uniforms carried. Officer Brent Maddox, Sergeant Kyle Harlan, and Deputy Ray Collins. 3 men who, in the eyes of the town, were symbols of authority. To Marcus, they were executioners, his daughter's murderers. Yet when he began to watch them, he saw what the world refused to see: their arrogance, their corruption, and their chilling normalcy. Brent Maddox was the youngest of the 3, 28, handsome in a rugged way, with a jawline that made him look like the poster boy for small-town law enforcement. He had charm, an easy smile, and a wife who adored him, Laura, a church-going woman who posted photos of their toddler son in matching blue outfits on Facebook. Neighbors saw Maddox as a family man, a hero who kept the streets safe, but when he slipped into the bar after hours, the mask came off. Marcus watched from a corner booth one evening as Maddox threw back whiskey shots, bragging to fellow officers. "She was asking for it," he sneered, voice low but dripping with confidence. "These girls think they can talk back, walk around like they own the place. We showed her." The laughter that followed was hollow, cruel. Maddox smirked like a man who believed he was untouchable. And in that moment, Marcus saw the rot beneath the polished image, a man who hid his monstrosity behind family portraits and Sunday service. Sergeant Kyle Harlan was different. Older, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose presence filled a room. He had served 20 years in the department, a veteran officer known for his strict discipline and unwavering loyalty to his men. To the town, Harlan was the backbone of the force. To Marcus, he was the orchestrator. Harlan carried himself with the arrogance of a man who knew the system bent to him. When questioned by reporters about Alana's death, he spoke with cold indifference. "It's a tragedy, sure, but we found no wrongdoing. The investigation is closed." His words were rehearsed, his expression unflinching, but behind closed doors, Marcus saw the cracks. Harlan had a teenage son who despised him, a wife who barely spoke to him. He drank alone in his garage, muttering under his breath about ungrateful kids and soft men who didn't understand what it took to keep order. To Harlan, the crime wasn't just a moment of violence, it was a lesson, a message to the town that power was untouchable. In his mind, authority had to be enforced by fear, by control, and if a black girl had to die to remind people of that, then so be it. Then there was Deputy Ray Collins, the weakest of the 3, but perhaps the most dangerous because of it. 35, soft around the middle with a receding hairline and a bitterness that clung to him like sweat. Collins had always been second best in training, second best on patrol, second best in life. The other officers mocked him, the townsfolk ignored him, but with a badge, he had power. Collins was the one Marcus hated most, because he was the one who looked the most guilty. Not guilty in the sense of conscience, no. Collins justified everything with a coward's logic. Orders are orders. He told a friend in a hushed conversation Marcus recorded from a diner booth. Harlan called the shots. I just did what I had to do. But Marcus knew better. Collins had been there, had laid hands on Alana, had laughed while she cried, and now he sat in his modest house with his wife and 2 daughters, pretending to be a family man, pretending his hands weren't drenched in blood. The system shielded them all. The police chief dismissed the case before it even reached the courts, shaking hands with Harlan at town hall while reporters scribbled their notes. The mayor praised the department for their quick resolution of the matter. Judges who owed favors to the department looked the other way. The district attorney, cornered by political pressure, refused to press charges, and the community's some believed the lies, others feared the truth. People whispered in grocery store aisles, some shaking their heads in pity, others nodding in agreement with the story the cops spun. She shouldn't have been out so late. She must have provoked him. Marcus saw it for what it was. Complicity. Silence was protection. And every handshake, every shrug, every turn, I was another layer of armor wrapped around the men who had destroyed his daughter. What chilled Marcus most wasn't their evil, it was their humanity. Maddox kissing his toddler's forehead before heading to patrol. Harlan grilling steaks in his backyard while his wife sat in silence across the table. Collins tucking his daughters into bed with clumsy affection, humming lullabies as if he hadn't taken another man's child from the world. They weren't monsters in the way Hollywood painted them. They were men, men who laughed, men who loved, men who were loved in return, and that made their crime more terrifying because it wasn't born from desperation or madness. It was born from choice. They chose to kill her, and now they chose to live as if it had never happened. Marcus sat in his truck one evening, watching from a distance as Maddox lifted his son into the air, both of them laughing in the golden light of sunset. For a moment, Marcus's chest tightened with something other than rage. He saw his own life reflected back, the father, the child, the simple joy of a fleeting moment. But then the image twisted. He remembered his daughter's smile, her laugh, her lifeless body on a hospital bed, and the rage returned, sharp as glass. The system had given these men immunity, society had given them acceptance, but Marcus Hayes would give them what they truly deserved. For weeks, rage had eaten him alive. It had consumed his nights, carved hollows beneath his eyes, and left him staggering like a man stripped of purpose. Yet, as he watched Maddox playing with his son, as he saw Collins kissing his daughters goodnight, as he listened to Harlan boast at the bar, something inside Marcus shifted. The grief was still there, grief so sharp it left him breathless, but beneath it, a new steel began to form. He had been an FBI agent. He had spent decades dismantling syndicates, hunting killers, and exposing corruption. He knew how predators thought. He knew how to track, corner, and dismantle them piece by piece. And now, he would turn those skills inward. The transition was slow at first. One night, he cleared his dining table of grief-soaked photos and stacks of rejected case files. Instead, he laid out fresh paper, sharpened pencils, and opened his old leather briefcase. On the table he drew 3 names: Maddox, Harlan, Collins. Beneath each, he began to write everything he knew: work schedules, patrol routes, family ties, habits, weaknesses. He mapped their world like he would a criminal network, drawing lines between them, arrows to their superiors, notes about the corrupt DA and the police chief. Slowly, the chaos of grief gave way to something cleaner. Control. For the first time since Alana's death, Marcus felt purpose. Still, the inner war raged. Some nights, as he stared at the lines of ink connecting names and places, he felt the pull of morality. He remembered the words hammered into him during FBI training: "We are the wall between order and chaos. If we cross that line, we destroy what we swore to protect." Was he about to become the very thing he had hunted his entire life? He thought of Alana's smile, of her dream to fight injustice in courtrooms, of her insistence that we can't live in fear of every badge we see. Would she have wanted this? Would she want him to kill? The questions clawed at him. One moment he was certain these men had to die. The next he was paralyzed, haunted by the thought that he might betray his daughter's memory by choosing blood over principle. But every time doubt began to soften him. He remembered the deep words, "Best thing you can do is grieve and move on." He remembered Harlan on TV, calling her death a tragedy with the hollow indifference of a man untouchable. He remembered Maddox laughing in a bar, dismissing her as asking for it. And then the doubt dissolved, replaced by fire. The law had failed. The courts had betrayed him. Justice, as written in books, was an illusion. So Marcus decided, if the system refused to act, Planning became his obsession. He spent hours in his truck, trailing them without being seen. His FBI instincts returned with frightening ease. Maddox always stopped at the same liquor store after patrol. Harlan always hit the gym at 6 in the morning before heading to the station. Collins drove his daughters to school at exactly 7:45 a.m., lingering in his cruiser afterward as if the badge excused his idleness. Marcus noted at all times, places, blind spots. He knew which alleys had broken cameras, which bars had back exits, which streets emptied after dark. He charted their vulnerabilities like a hunter studying prey. But this wasn't just about killing, not yet. Marcus wanted them to feel fear first, to feel hunted. He began small. A slashed tire on Collins's cruiser, discovered at dawn. Maddox's mailbox, smashed in, a crude reminder that the safety of his home was a lie. Harlan's gym locker, mysteriously broken into, his clothes shredded and scattered. Each act was careful, untraceable, designed to whisper one truth: you are not untouchable. At night, Marcus sat in his dimly lit living room, his daughter's photo propped on the table, beside his pistol. "I'm coming for them," he whispered. "I'll make them see what you felt in your last moments. I'll make them understand." Yet even as his resolve sharpened, the conflict within him deepened. On one hand, revenge promised release. Every detail of his plan brought a surge of control, a sense of power that grief had stolen. He imagined standing over Maddox, gun pressed to his temple, the man's arrogant smile erased by terror. He imagined Harlan begging for mercy, Collins weeping like a coward. The fantasies kept him awake, not with fear but with anticipation. The other hand, he knew what came after. He had studied men who walked this path, vigilantes, killers who justified their crimes as justice. Their stories always ended the same: prison, death, or madness. Would he become one of them? Would his daughter's memory be tainted by the blood he spilled? The question haunted him, but then he remembered her body on that hospital bed, her warmth fading beneath his trembling hand. He remembered the laughter of those men as they walked free. The answer became clear. This wasn't about morality anymore. This was about survival, his and the soul of the daughter they had destroyed. Marcus began stockpiling tools, not guns alone, but surveillance gear, lockpicks, burner phones. Old habits resurfaced, the ones he had thought he'd buried with his badge. He worked out again, running at dawn, lifting weights in his garage until his muscles burned. His body needed to remember what it meant to be sharp, to be dangerous. He rehearsed scenarios, exits, ambushes. He studied blueprints of the police station, knew which doors were left unlocked during night shifts, knew which bars the officers favored and at what hours. He wasn't reckless. He was deliberate. Every move would be calculated, every strike precise, but still, he kept two plans alive in his mind. One, to expose them, collect undeniable evidence, leak it to the press, drag their crimes into the light. Two, to kill them outright, leaving their blood as the only testimony. For weeks, he warred between the two, but each attempt at gathering proof collapsed under the system's corruption. Cameras erased, witnesses intimidated, records altered. He realized the truth with bitter clarity. Exposure would never work. These men would never face justice in a courtroom. And so, the second plan remained. The darker one, the final one. The night he chose it for good, Marcus sat alone in his daughter's room. Her books were still stacked neatly, her bed still made, her favorite sweater draped across the chair. He held it to his face, inhaling the faint trace of her scent, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to weep openly. When the tears slowed, he stood, walked to the gun safe, and pulled out his weapon. He laid it on the desk beside her books, beside her dreams of law and justice. "I tried," he whispered, voice raw. "I tried to honor you with the law, but the law is dead, and I can't let them live while you lie in the ground." He gripped the gun, and with it, his decision. The father who had spiraled into grief was gone. The agent who had once upheld the law was gone. What remained was something new, something colder. Marcus Hayes was no longer a man waiting for justice. He was justice, but justice never walks unchallenged. The moment Marcus Hayes crossed that line, when he shifted from grieving father to executioner in waiting, the system seemed to sense it. It was as though the same walls that had protected his daughter's killers were now closing in to smother him. Before he could strike, it began with warnings, subtle at first. A note slipped under his front door one evening, scrawled in a hand he didn't recognize. "Stop digging or you'll join her." He burned it in the sink, the flames licking away the paper, but the message lodged itself in his mind like shrapnel. The next day, a black SUV idled outside his house for hours. its tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. Marcus watched. From behind the curtains, his grip tightening on the pistol holstered at his hip. He waited, but the vehicle eventually rolled away, leaving only silence and unease. Then the intimidation grew louder. 2 uniformed officers came to his door under the pretense of a wellness check. They smiled politely, but their eyes carried a predator's weight. "Just making sure you're doing okay, Mr. Hayes," one of them said, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. The other officer smirked, glancing at the photos of Alana still framed on the mantel. "Beautiful girl. Shame what happened." Marcus said nothing. He simply closed the door in their faces, but his hands trembled as he bolted it shut. The message was clear. They knew he was moving, and they were watching. Family added another layer of resistance. His younger sister, Denise, drove 3 hours from the city after hearing rumors about Marcus's behavior. She found him hunched over maps in the dim light of his dining room, his walls lined with photographs, schedules, and notes. Marcus's hurt voice broke as she stepped inside. "What are you doing?" He didn't look up. "What I should have done from the start. You're scaring me." She reached for the papers, but he pulled them back like they were sacred. "This isn't you. You're not a killer." "They killed her," he snapped, finally meeting her eyes. His voice cracked, the rage barely contained. "They raped her, murdered her, and walked free. Tell me, Denise, what would you do if it was your daughter?" She flinched, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'd want to kill them. God help me, I would. But Marcus, if you do this, you'll lose yourself. You'll lose what's left of her." Her words cut deep. For a moment, Marcus felt the weight of them pressing against his chest, suffocating. But then he remembered Alana's broken body, the cold indifference of the DA, the laughter of Maddox in that bar. His resolve returned, harder than steel. "Go home, Denise," he said softly. "Don't come back." It was the last time she saw him as the man she once knew. The cops, meanwhile, grew suspicious. Maddox, Harlan, and Collins were not fools. They began to feel the edges of Marcus's silent war pressing in. Tires slashed, lockers broken, whispers in the dark someone was hunting them. Harlan tightened their security. He demanded more patrols near their homes, installed cameras, and warned his men to be on guard. Maddox carried his service weapon even when off duty, his hand twitching near it whenever a shadow moved. Collins grew paranoid, jumping at every noise, drinking more heavily to dull the gnawing fear. Marcus saw it all. Their confidence, once unshakable, was cracking, and yet their suspicion turned into countermeasures. One night, while trailing Collins, Marcus noticed a second cruiser following him, a tail. They knew he was watching, and now they were watching him back. The following week, false charges appeared. Marcus was pulled over late at night, accused of reckless driving. He was handcuffed, humiliated, and held for hours before being released without explanation. Days later, a notice arrived in the mail. His property was under review for zoning violations. It was a thinly veiled attempt to destabilize him, to paint him as unstable, dangerous, unhinged. Even neighbors turned cold. Whispers followed him at the grocery store. Someone spray-painted cop killer wannabe on his fence. The isolation was suffocating, but Marcus wore it like armor. The more they pushed, the clearer his path became. Blood was the next step. His first strike wasn't fatal, but it was a message. Maddox left the bar one evening, swaggering toward his truck. Marcus emerged from the shadows, steel pipe in hand, and swung. The crack of bone echoed as Maddox crumpled, screaming, his leg shattered. Marcus vanished before help arrived, leaving behind nothing but fear. The town buzzed with the news. Assault on an officer headlines read, but no suspect was named. Maddox, humiliated, whispered in dark corners that it was that FBI bastard, but without proof. He had only rage. Harlan responded with fury. "Lock him down," he ordered his men. Patrols doubled around Marcus's neighborhood. Anonymous calls flooded his phone. One night his front window shattered under the weight of a thrown brick. Attached was a note. "You're dead, Hayes." Marcus didn't flinch. He simply loaded another clip into his pistol. Allies betrayed him. To dot an old FBI colleague, Daniel Crow came to see him after hearing whispers in federal circles. Crow was a man Marcus had once trusted with his life. He sat across from him, eyes heavy with sorrow. "You're on their radar, Marcus," Crow said quietly. "Word is, they're building a case. They're not gonna let this slide. Walk away while you can." "I can't." Crow leaned forward, voice sharp. "You think you're playing chess, but they've got the whole board wired. They'll bury you." Marcus's jaw clenched. "Then let them try." Crow sighed, shaking his head. "You'll lose everything. And when you do, they'll say you deserved it." For a flicker of a second, Marcus saw truth in Crow's words. But truth didn't bring his daughter back. Truth didn't punish monsters, only action would. When Crow left, Marcus felt the loneliness of his war deepen. Allies were gone. Family had turned away. All he had left was the mission. Each step forward became bloodier. Collins was next. Marcus cornered him in a parking lot after midnight, pressing a blade to his throat. The coward trembled, tears streaming down his face, babbling excuses. I didn't want to. Harlan made me. I didn't. Marcus pressed harder, the tip drawing a thin line of blood. You laughed while she screamed, he hissed. Collins sobbed, begging, promising silence if spared. Marcus pulled back. Not Mosey's strategy. Killing him then would expose too much, too soon. Instead he left Collins trembling in the dark, marked with terror. The message was clear. Your time is coming. The system's resistance grew violent. An unmarked car tried to run Marcus off the road. His mailbox exploded one morning, a crude homemade bomb sending wood splinters across his yard. At night, he heard footsteps around his home, voices whispering outside his windows. They wanted to break him before he struck, but Marcus had been trained for worse. He fortified his house, set traps in the yard, rigged cameras along the perimeter. Every attempt to scare him only sharpened his resolve. The harder they pushed, the harder he pushed back, yet the emotional toll weighed heavy. At night he sat in Alana's room, whispering apologies to her photo. I'm becoming something you'd hate, he confessed, tears streaking his face. But I don't know how else to honor you. His voice broke. Forgive me, baby, forgive me. The war was not just against the system, but against himself. Each act of violence drew him closer to the men he despised, and he knew it. But the point of no return had already been crossed. The system resisted him with everything it had betrayal, false charges, blood. But Marcus Hayes pushed through, step by bloody step, and in the shadows of his grief, his plan neared its final stage. The storm was gathering, and soon it would break. The storm was gathering, and soon it would break. Marcus chose the night it would happen with the same precision he'd once reserved for federal raids. A cold front moved in from the river, wind knifing down empty streets, rattling loose signs and guttering street lamps. The town seemed to hold its breath. Patrol routes were predictable. He'd mapped them 100 times. He knew which alleys the cameras missed, which corners of darkness swallowed men whole. He dressed in black, taped his hands, and slipped Alana's bracelet into his pocket. The metal was warm for a heartbeat. Then it cooled against his skin like a promise. He started with the weakest link. Deputy Ray Collins clocked off at 12:17 a.m., a bloated shadow trudging across the employee lot behind the station. He moved slower these days, weighed down by paranoia and liquor. He glanced over his shoulder twice, scanning the dark as if he knew it had grown teeth. The wind shoved litter across the asphalt. A security light buzzed and died. But Marcus watched from behind the chain link. He had chosen this spot because the river's hum would swallow most sounds, and because Collins had parked far from the cluster of cruisers, closer to the fence, closer to escape. Marcus slid the bolt cutters through a diamond in the chain link and squeezed. The metal parted. He slipped through and ghosted along the cars until Collins reached his sedan. Keys on the roof, Marcus said, voice flat. Collins flinched so hard the keys clattered from his hands. He spun, mouth open, hunting for a badge, a camera, an audience. To witness his bravery he found none, only Marcus.com, steady eyes like winter water. You, Collins whispered, his breath smoked in the cold. You can't. Marcus stepped closer, hands on the hood. Collins obeyed, palms spread, fingers shaking. Marcus frisked him, service weapon, ankle blade, cuffs, then tossed the gear under the adjacent car. When Collins tried to crane his neck, Marcus pressed him down by the back of the skull. You laughed, Marcus said, quiet enough to be mistaken for mercy, while she begged. I didn't. Harlan, you laughed. Collins started to cry, a wet, rasping sound, ugly and human. I've got kids, he croaked. So did the fathers of the men I arrested, Marcus said, and some of them still went to prison. A cruiser rolled past the far side of the lot, tires hissing. Both men froze. The car turned the corner and vanished. The wind returned. Get in, Marcus ordered. He popped the trunk, face down. Collins stared into the dark maw of the trunk and shook his head. Please, you'll live if you listen. It wasn't a promise, Marcus believed, but it was a shape of hope. Collins needed to climb inside. The deputy slid into the trunk, clumsy and trembling. Marcus cuffed his ankles, duct-taped his wrists, then shut the lid. Metal thud, DED. They drove to the quarry. Marcus had chosen it because the access road was chewed into washboard ridges and because the pit below drank noise and light. He parked near the lift. The wind harried the water, throwing chop against the rock. He pulled Collins out and sat him on the gravel. The deputy's face was grey with terror. "I want the truth," Marcus said. "Names, orders, the order of what you did. To her, all of it." Collins shook his head. "I'll be killed, you already were," Marcus said. "The night you touched her, you ended whatever life you could have had." The confession came in bursts, messy, wounded, small. Harlan had set the tone. Maddox had fed the hunger. Collins had followed because following was easier than being nothing. He described the parking lot, the hands, the words, the moment the laughter curdled into death. Marcus kept his eyes on the black water while the deputy spoke, because if he looked at Collins, he'd shoot him before the last word fell when it was over. Marcus set his phone on the hood and stopped the recording. His fingers trembled. He told himself it was the cold. "I never meant to." Collins started. Marcus hit him once, open palm to the jaw. The man tumbled onto the gravel, stunned. Marcus stood above him, chest heaving, rage burning clean. The river wind tore at his coat. "Stand up," Marcus said. Collins rose, wobbling. "Are you going to kill me?" Marcus heard the question as if asked from far away. He had pictured this night 1,000 times. Pictured blood and silence, pictured the world without this coward taking up space in it, and yet his daughter's voice brushed the inside of his skull, not words, just warmth. He stepped forward, and bound a slipknot around Collins's wrists with a length of nylon line, then tied the other end to a rusted iron mooring spike. "You're going to walk," Marcus said. "You're going to the DA, not the one here, the one to count is over. You're going to hand them that recording, and you're going to testify. If you don't, if you run, if you drink, if you whisper to Harlan, I will come back, and I will not bring rope." Collins nodded so violently it looked like a seizure. "I will, I swear." Marcus cut the ankle cuffs. Collins stumbled, then collapsed to his knees. He reached for Marcus's coat, hem like a penitent reaching for a robe. Marcus stepped back, disgust curdled with pity. "Go," he said. Collins fled into the dark, the line dragging behind him like a tail. Marcus stood alone at the pit's edge until the wind froze his tears. Mercy, he thought, feels like weakness when rage is easier. He hated that he had given any piece of himself that could still be soft. He hated even more that the softness hurt worse than the hate. He turned back toward town. There were 2 more names. Brent Maddox had learned to be afraid of shadows. He carried it with him like a second holster, all nerve and twitch. He left the bar early now, eyes on the mirror, one hand on the butt of his pistol. He had moved his wife and child to her sister's place for a few weeks, told the neighbors it was precaution. He slept in his patrol truck, parked in the half-finished development off County Line, house frames like rib cages against the sky. Marcus entered the site an hour after midnight. He had scouted it 2 nights prior. No cameras yet, just wood and nails and tarps snapping against wind. He moved between skeletal walls, boots whispering over dust. He could smell sawdust and the metallic ghost of rain. Maddox stood under an unfinished roofline staring into the dark with the squint of a man trying to read the weather. He didn't hear Marcus until the pipe slid across the gravel. He spun and drew. "Don't," Marcus said. His voice carried a quiet that froze action hands. "Where I can see them." Maddox's voice cracked now. Marcus lifted his hands. A winter moon cut through clouds. They saw each other clearly for the first time. Maddox's bravado died in the open air. "You know who I am," Marcus said. Maddox swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing. "Some men get smaller when they're afraid." Maddox inflated his chest and tried to look big. "You're that washed-up Fed who thinks he can scare people." "I don't scare people," Marcus said. "I end them." Maddox fired. The bullet punched a splintering hole in a stud inches from Marcus's shoulder. Marcus dropped, rolled, and flung a handful of gravel where Maddox's eyes would go. The officer flinched, blinked, fired again and the shot whined into the frame. Marcus closed the distance. The pipe in his hand wasn't a weapon so much as a rhythm, an old song the body knows. He struck the wrist. The pistol clattered away. He struck the knee. Maddox went down, howling, grabbing at air. Marcus kicked the gun under a pile of tuba, then drove the pipe into the decking beside Maddox's head and left it quivering there, humming like a tuning fork. Maddox laughed, breath hitching. "You going to lecture me? Put on your badge in your head and tell me about justice." "No." Marcus's voice was calm. "I'm going to ask you to say her name." Maddox smirked. "Which one?" Marcus's boot found Maddox's ribs. But air burst from him in a grunt. "Say her name." "Your daughter." Maddox panted. "Alana." He smiled through blood. All that noise she made in the lot, you hear it when you sleep. Something tore inside Marcus. He had thought he was out of tears, but rage has glands of its own. He grabbed the officer by the collar and dragged him across the decking to the open stairwell, shaft a square of black that fell 2 stories into the raw concrete basement. The wind rushed up like breath from a throat. Confess, Marcus said. To a camera this time. He held his phone above Maddox's face. To your God, if you have one. Maddox spit blood at the lens. You think I'm afraid to die? He laughed. A broken thing. We kept the video. The world tilted. For a second, Marcus saw red static and nothing else. Where insurance? Maddox grinned. Harlan's got a copy. Said if some bleeding heart judge ever got brave, he'd bury her twice, first in court, then in memory. The words landed like nails driven into Marcus's chest. He saw, with terrible clarity, his daughter's last minutes held like a talisman, by the man who had engineered them. It made the shaft below him seem comforting. He wiped the lens. Say her name, he repeated. The phone recorded the wreck of Maddox's grin. Alana, Maddox said at last, sneer emptying into fear. Because something in Marcus's face told the truth, there would be no reprieve, no bargain. Alana, Hayes. Marcus tucked the phone away. He held Maddox a moment longer and saw, not a monster, but the sum of 1,000 choices turned to rot. He thought of a toddler in matching blue, a wife who didn't know what she loved. He thought of the bracelet in his pocket and the white sheet over the body. I wanted to be a man she could be proud of, Marcus said, not sure to whom he spoke. I don't know what I am now. He let go. Maddox fell into the dark. The sound he made when he hit was wet and short and honest. Marcus closed his eyes. Somewhere far away, a tarp snapped like a sail. The wind moved on. He descended the temporary stairs, boots hollow on treads. Maddox was a broken geometry on the concrete. Marcus took the officer's phone, then his badge, then the body cam he'd started wearing off duty like a superstition. He pocketed them all and left. On the way out, he paused beneath that slice of moon and realized his hands were shaking not with fear, but with the knowledge that a line had receded behind him and would not come back. He had killed before in the course of duty, but this was different. This was a choice made in cold blood under a winter sky. He didn't pray. He didn't know how anymore. The town woke to a rumor with bones. An officer found dead in a construction site. The department swarmed like hornets stirred by a stick. Sergeant Kyle Harlan locked the building, called in state troopers, and barked into a dozen phones. He looked older by noon, eyes like 2 chips of flint, jaw grinding. He told the press. It was a tragic accident during a personal errand. He told his men to load up. He told himself the universe obeyed men like him. Marcus watched the press conference from his truck, jaw tight, teeth aching. When Harlan said tragic, Marcus heard a door slam shut on the word murder. When he said personal errand, Marcus heard a smirk. And when he said ongoing investigation, Marcus heard a challenge. Harlan drove directly from the podium to a storage unit on the edge of town, the kind with orange doors and code-locked gates. Marcus had guessed this might be the vault for scenes. Men like Harlan preferred places that felt temporary and anonymous. He followed at a distance, swapped plates at a gas station, and slipped into a neighboring unit he'd rented that afternoon with cash and a fake name. He drilled a peephole through drywall where the units kissed. The metal screamed once, then, quieted. He leaned to the hole and watched. Harlan entered his unit with a banker's box and the tunnel vision calm of a man who believes in his own narratives. He set the box on a table, keyed open a steel lockbox, and revealed the heart of the rot, drives, discs, and a folder fat with old indulgences. He pulled one disc in a slim case and stared at it for a long time. Whatever he saw on that plane, white circle had made him God once. He put it in a portable player, sat on a folding chair, and pressed play. Marcus's breath hitched. He had not prepared for the sound of the past to be so present. He closed his eyes and listened to the low blur of voices bleeding through the wall, the cadence enough to know, if not the words. He steadied himself on the table, then on nothing at all. He unlocked his unit, stepped into the cold corridor, and opened Harlan's door. The sergeant had his pistol up before Marcus's silhouette finished forming. He saw who it was and smiled, with half his mouth. I wondered when you'd come. I heard you like trophies, Marcus said. His voice sounded like it belonged to someone he used to be. He nodded at the player on the table. That one goes back to me. Harlan didn't glance at it. He kept the gun trained at center mass, textbook perfect. You think you're a righteous man doing a filthy job, he said. But you're just a filthy man who found a story. You aren't the first father to come for me. You won't be the last. Marcus took one step inside and shut the door behind him. It clicked like a trigger reset. Get up. Why, so you can monologue? Harlan's eyes glittered. Maddox made a racket when he fell. Did you savor it? Marcus moved quicker than grief. He slapped the pistol aside and drove his shoulder into Harlan's chest. They hit the table, scattering drives and discs. The player skittered, still worried. Harlan hooked Marcus's leg and they went down in a tangle of knees and elbows. Years of training meeting years of rage. Harlan fought like a man who enjoyed it. He gouged a knee and used the environment edge of the lockbox to Marcus's temple, table leg into his ribs. Marcus answered with quiet, efficient brutality, palm heels, elbows, the snap of a head into concrete. They broke apart chests, heaving blood webbing from both their mouths. You're no different, Harlan panted. You want to make it mean something. It doesn't. It's only power. Marcus's vision tunneled. He saw Alana on the white sheet bed, saw the DA's averted eyes, saw Collins running like a man with an angel and a knife at his back. He saw himself in a mirror made of Harlan's words. No different. Harlan lunged for the gun. Marcus kicked it away as they crashed into the lockbox, toppled it, and a rain of evidence spilled. Not just Alana, but others' names Marcus didn't know, faces he wished he never would. The storage unit was a mausoleum of unburied crimes. Marcus grabbed a drive, any drive, and flung it against the wall. Plastic burst. A chip ricocheted. Harlan roared and tackled him hard, fist hammering into Marcus's ear until the world filled with ocean. Look at you, Harlan hissed, breath hot, spit flecking, a killer begging to be blessed. Something broke loose inside Marcus that had nothing to do with bone. He stopped thinking. He stopped remembering seminars and maxims and prayers. He fought like drowning. He bit Harlan's wrist until iron flooded his mouth. He slammed an elbow into the man's throat. He drove him backward over the chair. They went down together, a knot of human damage. They reached for the same object at the same time. The player's power cord. Harlan looped it. Marcus pulled it away. It became a serpent between them. Harlan went for Marcus's eyes. Marcus rammed his forehead into Harlan's nose until something cracked and warm. They rolled, hit the wall, slid. The cord lay like a question mark at their knees. Harlan reached first. He looped it around Marcus's neck and yanked. White noise engulfed the world. Stars burst behind Marcus's eyes. He clawed at the cable, got a finger under, bought a breath that burned. A thought arrived at the edge of obliteration. If I die here, he keeps everything. Marcus stopped pulling away and surged forward instead, driving Harlan back into the opposite wall. Again, until the man's grip loosened. Marcus wrenched the cord free, reversed it, looped it around Harlan's throat, and pulled. The sergeant's hands clawed at the air. His boot found the player and kicked it under the table. His face bloomed a dark, ugly color. He scrabbled it. The line found Marcus's fingers, and dug, pleading wordlessly with eyes that had never begged for anything. Time stretched thin as old tape. In that lengthening second, Marcus saw himself, hands tight on a weapon that wasn't a gun, eyes cold, jaw set in a shape he'd seen in mirrors on other men. He heard Alana laughing somewhere he couldn't follow. He heard Maddox say insurance. He heard Collins sob, I'll testify. He heard Denise whisper, you'll lose what's left of her. Marcus's grip loosened. Harlan inhaled a ragged thread of air, then, with cobra speed, drove a box cutter from his sleeve into Marcus's side. Pain went off like a flare. Marcus's legs gave. The cord slackened. The world tilted. They separated by inches. Both men stared at the knife handle protruding from Marcus's ribs, then at each other. The room shrank to breath and choice. Smiled through ruin. There it is, he rasped. Conscience. Always late to the party. He went for the gun again. Marcus moved on something older than conscience. He ripped the cutter free, felt the hot spill, and threw himself forward. They collided at the table edge. Marcus drove the blade up beneath Harlan's ribcage. Once, twice, a third time that felt like absolution and damnation braided. Harlan's eyes widened, not with fear, but with recognitions. If he had always known this was how his story ended. They slid to the floor, locked together. Harlan's hand pressed Marcus's shoulder as if to steady him, or to say you did it, or to ask who are you now. The answer was a silence that filled the room. When it was over, the unit hummed with the small electric lives of things. The security light, the fan in the hallway, the last spin of the player before it died. Marcus crawled to it, trembling, and found the disc tray still shut. He pressed the button. The tray emerged like a tongue of judgment. The disc gleamed plain and obscene. He pocketed it with fingers that didn't feel like his. He stood, swayed, and pressed a hand to his side. Blood warmed his palm, then cooled quickly in the draft. He looked down at Harlan, at the cord coiled near his neck, at the smears and scrapes that had turned the concrete into a ledger. He had killed men in service. He had killed a man out of service. He had spared one to make him speak. He had become a composite of vows broken and vows kept. He gathered everything he could carry, 2 drives, the disc, the folder fat with names. He stuffed them into a duffel. Each piece was a weight and a witness. He limped to the door, then turned back and whispered to the shape on the floor, "Say her name." There was no answer, and for once that was enough. Outside, dawn gnawed at the horizon. Sirens braided faintly somewhere to the south, perhaps the construction site, perhaps nothing to do with him at all. He slid into his truck and stared into the rear view. The man there was older than morning, eyes washed pale, jaw gritted around a truth he couldn't spit out. He dialed Denise. She answered on the first ring, voice sleep rough, fear already threaded through it. "Marcus, I've got the proof," he said. He could hear the blood in his mouth. "For Alana, for others. Where are you? Doesn't matter." He swallowed. "I need you to take something to the state AG, or the feds. Anyone not owned." "Marcus, I'm hurt," he said, finally, honest. "But I'm not calling for help. I'm calling to keep this from dying with me." "Where are you?" she repeated, urgent and breaking. He told her the drop, the church mailbox, where Alana had once mailed letters to colleges. He would leave the duffel there in 10 minutes. Denise whispered his name like a prayer. He hung up before the prayer turned into a plea. He drove with the window cracked, the cold keeping him awake. The bracelet in his pocket tapped against his thigh with each bump, a metronome counting out the end of a song. He pulled up to the church, slid from the seat, and nearly blacked out. He forced himself upright, stuffed the duffel into the old blue mailbox, and turned the flag up like a signal from an island. Across the street, a squad car rolled to a stop. 2 officers watched him with blank faces that could have been sympathy or inventory. Marcus lifted his hands. He have to. Bullets. What he got was a barked command and a perimeter that smelled like fear. He knelt on the cold concrete. He thought of Alana's laughter. He tried to recall its exact pitch and failed, and the failure struck harder than any baton. He understood then what the cost truly was. Not prison, not pain, not even death. It was the erosion of her inside him, the way each violent choice sanded down a memory until it became a fact without warmth. The officers moved in. Hands found his shoulders, his wrists, the wound at his side. Everything became orders and lights and the taste of metal. Someone shouted for a medic. Someone read him rights. Someone recognized his name and swallowed the rest of a sentence. They put him on a gurney. The sky above the church burned pink for a second, like grace pretending to be sunrise. He turned his head and saw the mailbox flag still raised. He pictured Denise's hands opening it. He pictured drives sliding across it. Desk somewhere clean. He pictured, impossibly, a courtroom where names were said aloud and did not disappear. As the ambulance door swung shut, he felt for the bracelet and found it. He closed his fist around it until the edges bit his skin. "Alana," he whispered. The sound fogged the inside of the oxygen mask. "Alana." The siren started, a long, keening note that sounded like grief set to power. The town moved past the windows and smears. Somewhere behind them, a storage unit door stood open on a room that had run out of lies. Somewhere ahead, a woman who loved her brother would lift a flag and retrieve a bag and decide whether she believed in anything left to save. Marcus closed his eyes. He could feel something leaving blood, yes, but also certainty. He tried to hold on to one thing that didn't bleed, the choice to keep the proof moving even as he stopped. He did not know whether he had saved his daughter's name or stained it. He only knew he had said it, and that saying mattered. The world narrowed to the weight of a bracelet in a father's hand, to the sound of a siren, to the image of a mailbox flag raised against a pale morning. He had killed, and nothing he loved could make that untrue. He had chosen justice, and nothing he had lost could make that enough. In the end, the cost was everything he had left to pay. The ambulance swallowed the morning and left, the storage unit behind like a gutted lie. Marcus stared at the ceiling, bolts vibrating with the siren's pitch, the oxygen mask frosting with each breath. The bracelet in his fist cut little half-moons in his skin, the same crescents that once rimmed Alana's smile when she laughed. Too hard, he tried to hold the pain in one place, as if concentrating it could keep it from spilling everywhere else. He woke to white light and voices that practiced calm for a living. The wound was sewn, the morphine dialed, the questions stacked. A detective read him his rights while a nurse smoothed tape against his ribs. Denise stood at the door with her coat half off, her eyes searching his face like a map she no longer trusted. When they cuffed him to the bedrail, she reached for his hand and found the bracelet instead. She folded his fingers around it and whispered, "I've got the bag." He nodded, not because he believed in rescue, but because the act of nodding kept him upright inside. The arrest came before the anesthesia left. They made space for a camera. The district attorney's voice, once soft with procedural fatigue, into certainty. Words like homicide, burglary, aggravated assault were spoken cleanly, as if pronouncing them correctly could make them true enough to stand without context. A reporter asked whether the vigilante killing would overshadow the legitimate investigation into police misconduct. The detective said, "Each case will be treated on its merits." Marcus closed his eyes. He knew what merit looked like here, a badge on the wrong chest, but the duffel moved. Denise drove it out of town in a car that rattled at 60 and prayed, only with her teeth clenched. She passed the river that had held so many secrets and the quarry that had given one back. At a state office with too much glass, a young assistant attorney with a face not yet exhausted by compromise opened the bag and watched a town spool into evidence, ledgers, drives, the disk that had made Harlan feel untouchable. She did not look away. She called her boss. He called the state AG. By noon, a federal liaison had a copy. By evening, quiet men and windbreakers were walking into a police station with polite smiles and very particular questions. Collins arrived 2 days later, gray around the corners, his hands trembling with the effort of not running. He carried the confession Marcus had forced out of him at the quarry and wore the rope burn like a bracelet of his own. He asked for protection. He asked to speak without being interrupted by the history of who he had been. He gave them names, sequences, phrases no one had taught him to feel shame for until the moment they left his mouth. When he said Alana's name, he didn't choke. The room did. Subpoenas rippled outward. A judge signed warrants with a mouth like a straight line. The storage unit door lifted again. This time for cameras, lights, gloves, numbered evidence markers. The police chief resigned to prioritize family. The mayor declared that a small number of bad actors had tarnished a proud department. The DA who had told Marcus to move on promised complete transparency. The words were crisp, expensive, almost convincing. And yet, for once, truth traveled faster than spin. The footage that should never have existed in triplicate. Harlan had been thorough in his blasphemies. Other names, other faces, other fathers counting breaths at other hospital beds, patterns, memos, emails that had aged badly. A judge unlatched a decade of sealed complaints. The town learned to pronounce consent decree and civil rights without swallowing. On the evening news, 2 banners ran in uneasy parallel. State launches probe into police sexual violence and retired FBI agent charged in officer's death. The anchors practiced neutrality. The comments did not. On one corner, candles pooled wax on cold pavement under a photo of Alana in her diner apron. On another, a handful of men in matching sweatshirts muttered about traitors and order. The muralist who had painted angels on the elementary school wall came at night and sketched the outline of a new face, young bright, unfinished, beneath which a child later scrawled, "Be louder than fear." Marcus watched the first indictments crawl across a lobby television in the jail infirmary. The volume was turned low as if truth were a patient recovering from surgery. Denise visited with those small, irreplaceable details he would have missed. The mailbox flag had been lowered by a boy whose mother told him to do good when he could. The church ladies cooked casseroles for the busboy who had found a scarf by the dumpster and could no longer walk past that alley alone. Someone had tucked a thin law book under the mural and wrapped it in plastic against the rain. "They want you in their story as a warning," Denise said, voice steady because it had to be. "But she is in ours as a beginning." Marcus tried to imagine beginnings at his age. He pictured a door that wasn't locked from the outside. He pictured a room that did not ask him, every hour, what else he was willing to become. When the trial started, the town's calendar rearranged itself. Reporters drank thin coffee on courthouse steps. Former officers testified to practices they had called traditions 6 months earlier. Collins sat in the witness box and chose, every 10 seconds, not to lie. He didn't ask forgiveness. He asked to be specific. He said Harlan had collected trophies for leverage. He said Maddox laughed because laughing felt like permission. He said he had laughed because it was the only sound he knew that didn't sound like fear. Convictions came like winter slow in the body, sudden in the bones. The judge spoke the word guilty without savor, the way you say gravity or hunger. Sentences stacked, families clutched photo. A mother wailed and then clamped a hand over her mouth because the sound embarrassed her. A father sat with his hands folded like empty cups. Marcus's own case did not require spectacle. His public defender spoke of trauma and institutional betrayal as if they were mitigating circumstances that could be weighed on a scale. The DA spoke of civilization and the necessity of law as if civilization had not sold its badge to counties. Marcus listened to both without finding himself in either. The plea came like a step down onto a stair that may or may not have been there. Second degree, a number of years that looked specific but really meant a long time. He signed because arguing with a machine wastes blood. "Do you wish to address the court?" the judge asked. He thought of saying he had been faithful for decades to a promise that had not been faithful to him. He thought of saying that some doors only open with breaking. He thought of silence and chose it halfway. "I loved my daughter," he said, the past tense, a knife he'd never get used to. "I could not make the law love her. I did what I did." The gavel fell lightly, as if the judge believed in resonance. Prison reduced the world to rectangles, windows, beds, yards, bread. He worked in the laundry, discovering the particular smell of damp cotton that never quite dries. He learned which guards could be spoken to and which could not. He learned how to carry sorrow without letting it turn your shoulders forward forever. He kept the bracelet hidden in a folded hem and would slip it out at night, rested on his tongue until the metal took the warmth and then put it back, a small, private liturgy. Denise came as often as life let her. She brought outside weather and inside names. The state had agreed to federal monitoring. The department had a new chief who said the word change, and seemed to mean money and time and lawsuits and maybe a little repentance. The scholarship in Alana's name had sent a first-generation kid to a state school to study law because somebody has to make paper tell the truth. The mural had been retouched by students with paint under their fingernails. Once, a chaplain sat across from Marcus and held still long enough for the room to soften. He offered scriptures like bandages and then, when Marcus didn't move, set them down and asked, "What hurts today?" "I am afraid I traded everything for a kind of justice that can't hold a person," Marcus said. The chaplain nodded as if to himself. "There are two kinds we can get our hands on," he said. "The kind that stops a thing, and the kind that tries to mend. When one is all that's offered, we pretend it's the only one. What do I do with the part of me that still wants to break something every morning? Call it by its name, and don't give it your hands." Years passed as if someone else were wearing them. A parole board studied his paperwork like a weather report. Overcrowding and compliance shaved edges from the number attached to his name. Denise ironed a tie. He stood in front of people who had never met his daughter and told them what he could be trusted not to do. He did not perform remorse. He presented it like a scar. They stamped, a gate hummed. The sky outside felt wrong for a week, too tall, like a mistake. The house had not moved while he was gone, but everything in it had learned to live without him. Dust lay across photo frames like frost. He opened a drawer and touched his badge through the leather case. It had the dead weight of a coin from a country that no longer existed. He put it back and left it there, an artifact that would keep itself. Denise drove him to the mural. The paint had faded where little hands had traced the lines too many times, brightened in patches where someone had loved it with new color. Beneath Alana's face, a brass plate bore her name and a sentence about courage that sounded true even if it had come out of a committee. He stood with his hands in his pockets so he would not reach for the wall and leave a mark where it did not belong. They went to the cemetery when the light was soft enough to explain itself. The bench he had bought with money that felt like an apology sat exactly where he remembered, facing the stone that wore her name with a composure he envied. Denise brushed leaves away with a gentleness that did not perform. They didn't speak for a while. The silence there had agreed to keep secrets without making them heavy. "School asked me to talk about her," Denise said finally. "Not the case. Her, they want hope with edges." "What did you give them?" "The way she burned garlic and called it seasoning," she said, smiling. "How she picked fights with recipes. How she believed paperwork could be a weapon if you sharpened it, right?" He let the laugh come and let it end. "She was right about the garlic," he said. They stayed until the wind thinned. Denise squeezed his shoulder and left him with the stone, the bench, the low fence that kept nothing out. He sat until the names on nearby markers blurred into weather. He told the ground what he could not tell the air, that he had taken to lives and saved none. That he had delivered proof and still felt like a liar when he slept. That he could say justice now without tasting metal, but only just. He did not ask for forgiveness. He would not know where to put it. On the way home he stopped at the church. The blue mailbox had been replaced with one that looked the same except for a new hinge that squeaked. He lifted the flag and let it fall, testing the hinge as you test the truth once then again. He put his palm on the paint and felt cold climb into his skin. He left his hand there until it warmed. That night he made beans and rice and burned the garlic on purpose. The smoke alarm chirped and he laughed because it had the nerve to complain after all this time. He ate at the small table, the empty chair, across from him no longer a courtroom exhibit but simply a fact. He washed the dishes and left one water glass upside down on a towel to dry by itself. Before bed he took the bracelet off and set it on the nightstand, then picked it back up and looped it around his wrist. The skin beneath it had kept the shape. He lay down and watched the ceiling, not because he was afraid to sleep but because he wanted to mark this one day as a day he had lived all the way through. Outside, a siren rose and fell, a sound that could mean emergency, or return, or nothing to do with him. It faded. Wind shouldered the house. Somewhere a neighbor's porch light clicked on and then off. He said her name once, not to summon, not to insist, just to practice carrying it without breaking it. The room held the sound and gave it back to him, smaller, like a shell giving back the ocean. Justice had come in forms the world recognized. Charges, pleas, sentences, reports, meetings about policy, a memorial scholarship. A mural that needed fresh paint every spring. It had done what justice can do. It had stopped certain men. It had named certain acts. It had made a few rooms safer. It had not made the table less empty. It had not returned to his chest the simple weight of an untroubled breath. He closed his eyes and felt the bracelet press a familiar circle into his skin. The circle did not promise anything. It only remembered. That would have to be enough.